All right. I think we can get started.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Um, so I just want to say thank you, Krystal, for giving us an opportunity here to kind of get together with you and talk through some of the things that we're seeing out there, going into next year. I mean, who could have predicted 2020 to be the type of year that it was? Um,
Sure.
and now going into next year, it's going to be just something else. So appreciate being able to do this with you. Um, so I guess
Absolutely. Super excited to get started.
Awesome. So I'm Chip LaFleur, president of LaFleur Marketing. And I did actually just read that off the screen, even though I'm very familiar with that fact. Krystal, do you want to just do a quick intro?
I am Krystal Champlin with RJH Consulting. We have a consulting firm that works with law firms across the nation, assisting in operations management and growing their law practice.
Awesome. So we've had a chance to work with you on a handful of different occasions. I think that you guys always do great work. It's been a few years now. I mean, like I've known you for quite a few years now. We're up probably like 5 or 6, something like that.
While, yes.
It's been a little while. So we want to walk through kind of these different pieces. We're going to start out with kind of the foundation here, and we'll kind of keep it a little bit informal. I'll probably do a lot of talking, but just interrupt me anytime. Otherwise, I'll keep going forever. Um, so we want to start off by talking about really some of the foundational pieces. When we think of like digital marketing, we still want to always bring it back to the brand and who you are. And so we go through kind of an exercise ourselves and for a lot of our clients to try to help us define that. And a part of that exercise is just going through and saying like, who are we and what is our personality? Um, we come up with questions like this, like, what are you good at? Who do you want to be working with? Um, and if we can do a good job defining these things, and I really like to start out with that core question of like, why do you get up in the morning? Like, why do you do the thing that you do? And if you can define that, if you can define really a core purpose to what your organization is and what you do, then not only is that going to, not only is that going to draw clients that you want to work with to you, but it's going to help you to have a team of people who work with you that are really driven to do the excellent work that you need to have them do. And
Right.
so if, and I know you've gone through this process with a lot of your clients and just kind of helping them, what we found is that without somebody to kind of advocate and lead that discussion, it's pretty challenging, I think, to come in, especially from this side of things. I don't know if that's been your experience, Krystal, but
Absolutely. I think, some of the clients that we have worked with, they do not know what their brand is. They don't know what their ideal client is, or they are a general practice firm and really don't have a niche. And so they're functioning as generalists versus a specialist. And so some of the things that we do when we're defining their brand, we take a little deeper in to see what their revenue streams have been for the 5 to 7 years to see, hey, where are we getting our leads from? Do we want to practice that? Do we have a passion there? Do we have anybody on the staff that maybe has a diverse background that can bring something to the table there? So we really, really dive deep on, who are you and what is your why behind it?
no, I love that. And it's not, and yeah, I think a facilitator in going through that process makes a lot of sense. And it's, I think people jump to kind of we'll get into the next slide, but they jump to that visual element of what the brand is. And I think that the most important piece is what you're talking about, right? Like, why do you do what you do? What are your values?
It's their
And
session.
what's that?
It's their therapy session.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's not a marketing thing. It's just kind of figuring out who you are, why you do what you do, and then those value statements, that you're going to choose to live by. And I think a good litmus test for those value statements is, would I turn down business if it didn't fit within that, you know? Um, of course, the visual piece is an important element of that as well. When for our clients, what we like to do is we like to create this really kind of a guidebook, just a style guide for the brand. And in that we define, of course, the logo, and you see like the example here, where we define spacing and how much room you can have, how that measures, how you can determine what the usage is. it's going to save you so much time and energy to have this, something that you could provide to a freelancer or somebody who's going to create something for you for your social media. If you can give them this, then it gives them a great starting point. And then included in this, we love to have the personas, like you talked about, like who is your audience? Who should you be working with? The more you can define that, the less money you're going to spend on the marketing side that's wasted. We want all of your spend to be as efficient as possible. And when you know exactly who you're talking to, I think you're much more capable of really nailing that.
Perfect.
We use this graphic to talk about kind of what all those touch points can be, in the course of a day, or in the course of like a client journey. A lot of the law firms, especially that we work with, they're just so focused on this very first piece of the funnel, which is lead generation, right? Like, hey, how many leads do we get? And that's a reasonable thing to be tracking. I think it's an important part of kind of the ultimate like company scorecard that you take a look at on a weekly basis. So it is important, but it's not the only place that I think you should put kind of your marketing hat on to take a look at, because people become aware, they fill out a form, maybe you're able to track them down, get them to answer the phone, but what are the other things that are happening at the same time? And so, when we think of a cost per lead, we're thinking of how much did we spend on pay-per-click or something like that to get somebody through the door. But then what do we do with the ones that don't make it all the way through? Do we just toss them? Hopefully.
Stay in touch with them. Keep your brand in front of them.
Exactly. And we find that sometimes it even takes longer than a lot of firms realize that it takes to get a client in from that lead to close, or lead to sign. And so we'd like to have all these touch points along the way. And, we use the different tactics that are listed here. We kind of use this from the perspective that we tend to do a lot of the top row. Our clients really have to do a lot of the bottom row. But it doesn't have to be that way either. These are things that obviously, you could set up internally, externally. But this is kind of what we like to look at to say, how are we communicating to our audience in a way that's authentic to our brand at every single stage of this process?
Right.
Now we've seen some things kind of with COVID and with all of the changes that we've seen. This is from just a couple of months ago. And of course, everything moves at 1,000 miles an hour, it seems like this year. But these data points still seem to be holding true. And so, kind of early to mid COVID, people had shifting expectations of what that messaging might look like from a brand. And, these types of surveys are often relied on, for these huge enterprise organizations. But I think that we can take away a lot from them just in the way that we talk. Because our audience does pay attention. Our audiences pay attention to what we do, if we're in the community, especially in the legal side. And so where we saw a big increase, of what people expect from a brand is practical information and tips that help people deal with the situation. And so, if you're a personal injury firm, like how can you help communicate to the community what you can do to help survive, help us get through this? What are ways that you can help your community be safer? We very often advocate for having like a charitable arm for a firm. Like, what are you doing for the community? 83% of people who responded to these surveys, and this survey is a very large survey. And so 83% of the respondents, they like seeing that people are pledging money, they're helping people. I know as an organization, it's something we try to do. We try to do a half a day of volunteering instead of work every month. And like the value in that is of course in that we like doing good in the community, but we get so much value from just the people that we meet and get to work with, even in COVID. We're wearing masks, we're sticking with outside, we're being, I think, very careful, but we still have an opportunity to be in the community. And as especially for a law firm, you've got an opportunity to be able to communicate that out to your community. And I think one of the best ways to do that is by saying, look, we're going to take some of our employee time and we're going to donate that, because those employees are going to love it. They're going to talk about it. And then you get to avoid some of the pats on the back, the self-patting on the back. you don't want to go on Facebook and Instagram and say, hey, look how awesome we are. You know, we donated so much. You're going to get advocates in the community who are going to do that for you. And it's going to have this great association with a positive brand, which is what you really want to build.
And it leads to organic referrals.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Because who's not going to want to work with a lawyer that they know like chooses to do helpful work in the community?
Right.
Um, so there's some interesting behavioral changes that are coming out through this as well. Um, and we may think that these things are not that applicable. But if we start to look at some of the things that are on here that people are doing more often, you know, I think if we look at kind of these from the perspective of what is the future state, you know, of some of these things, people are exercising at home more frequently. What kind of product defects are we going to see come out the other side of that? You know, we're going to see defective equipment that's injuring people, that I think that we can be aware of. You know, people are working from home more frequently, but also they're getting food delivered more frequently. You know, we had a client down in Texas just settled a case for $9 million, which was a pizza driver um, driving way too fast, you know, on the road um, and under the influence. And the company that let him out on the road knew about this. You know, they knew that he had a history of this. And so I think it's important for us to know what these changes are so that we can adjust our messaging, you know, and adjust what types of cases too that we're looking for out of them.
One of the things that we have went over with our clients this year is really pivoting. You know, your personal injury motor vehicle accident firms, people weren't on the roads, they weren't seeing as many leads coming in, you know, so you really had to be creative with the type of cases that you were taking and how you were doing with your marketing. Very interesting for 2020.
Yeah, it's been a wild year, and what we've seen is our clients that have kind of doubled down. You know, like yeah, they had a couple of light months there early on in this, but they are now so far ahead of the ones that have pulled back. You know,
Mhm.
um, they kind of saw an opportunity in the market and they've jumped on it.
Right.
Kind of talking through that entire lead funnel. You know, there's kind of a like a tight point in the middle, right? And that's again where I think oftentimes when we look at a lead funnel, that's where it stops, you know. But if we do a good job with our brand kind of from the beginning to the end, you know, that is going to include and it's going to encourage people to do one of the things that is most important in our marketing campaign, which is leave a review. And so, you know, when it comes to your brand, like you have control over most of that, but you reach a point where you can't control what other people are saying about you. And so if you've done a very good job maintaining those value statements, those principles, you should end up with a better ecosystem of reviews, you know. And so we have good data. I mean, 96%, of course, and we kind of know this intuitively, but you know, reviews play a huge role in the decisions that we make. So we need to ask for them. Um, we need to make sure that we get that feedback. Now, this is from 2015, and this was specifically legal consumers. So between right around 2014, I think was the year that we saw the shift going from the majority of cases were coming from referral based to the majority of cases were coming from internet based. And this is just a year after that. And so I think that it's safe to assume that these numbers have increased pretty dramatically since then.
Absolutely. We live in an Amazon-based world. So we, you know, reviews and all of that really plays into our decision making. And there's some strategies that you can put in place in your in-house operations to make sure that your clients or your audience out there is reviewing you in a more positive way.
I think that's a key. I think that needs to be the kind of the key takeaway from that
Mhm.
part is like you can't just go out go out and talk to your paralegals and your office staff and say, hey, we need more reviews. And how
Right.
do we get them? And I know that's a big part of what you set up, which is
Hmm.
making sure that there's a process in place so that so it's not a question, you
Right.
know, did you ask for this review? Like, how did you go about doing that? You know?
And that we're getting good reviews. We're not asking
Yeah.
everybody to leave a review because
Yeah.
some clients will just be unhappy, and that's unfortunate. But you know, you want to push the positive of your firm.
For sure. For sure. One thing we've seen in the past is we've had clients who have basically asked everybody who had even a passing affiliation with their firm to leave a review. And I don't think you want to do that either. You know, like, I know you don't want to do that. We've seen accounts get banned, you know, at least temporarily. We've been able to get them back, you know, and we do not give that advice, but, you know, they've said, hey, I know this other firm in another state, they're going to write reviews for us. We're going to write reviews for them. And Google's going to find that out, you know. Rely on actual client reviews. If you're having such a hard time getting actual client reviews, then you really need to take a step back all the way to the beginning and say, what are we even about? You know, why is this happening?
You have to call me. I'll help you.
Yeah, exactly. So next we talk a little bit about the website, and there's some pretty key things that are changing in 2021 that I think that we'll get to. When we look at a website, we think of kind of two primary areas: the functionality and the findability. And I think it can be a little bit confusing to a lot of people because they say, well, what about design? Like, what about web design? And like, the thing is that design can be and should be amazing, but it contributes to the functionality of the site. And it also contributes to the way that people can find it. Because if your site is designed to just be beautiful, but has very little verbiage on it, has very little language on it, then Google's not going to have very much to crawl. And if Google doesn't have much to crawl, they're not going to know what your site's about. And so it really lives kind of underneath both of those things. But on the functionality side, you know, we believe in good design, period, but also in good user experience design. And that really speaks to the functionality. And so what we've seen is over time, websites look more and more similar, at least on the surface. There's a lot of ways to kind of get up and running and to check off both of these boxes, I think, at various stages of the funnel, of the process. So we'll talk about kind of getting something up and running and a couple of different ways to do that. So, you know, of course, you need a domain. You know, are you going to have it hosted through GoDaddy or through something like WP Engine? I would generally advocate for something like WP Engine or Pressable. They're managed hosts that are going to take care of the things that you would otherwise have to worry about. You know, they're very, very comfortable in the WordPress space. And by managed, what they mean is they're going in and making sure you have the nightly backups. They have a help desk that you can get on and talk to. You know, if you're not working with an agency, but you just want to kind of self-host, I think that's a really good way to do that. You know, imagery and design, I mean, yes, the layout of the site is important, but what is probably equally or more important is the photography that you use. A great designer is going to struggle to make a great website with bad photography, but an okay designer with great photography is probably going to be able to turn out something that looks pretty great.
Yeah.
You know, Krystal and I were talking a little bit earlier about the content management systems. There's a lot of platforms that we can choose from. And we'll talk a little bit about, I just want to touch on some of those. So, I mean, you know, we'll work with clients that come to us on a Wix site, WordPress. You know, we have some that are on more advanced platforms like Laravel or Symfony or Craft and things like that. So there's a wide variety of platforms that you can use, you know, at the kind of entry level end. You know, Squarespace and Wix are probably two of the more prevalent. And building a site on Wix or Squarespace, I think is perfectly fine. Like, it's a great way to get started. That probably has a runway that's at the entry level kind of beginning end that's relatively short. And then you have WordPress, which fills this huge space between something that's still pretty nimble and pretty entry level to something that can be very advanced and even at the enterprise level. You know, companies like Time and Sony, you know, have used WordPress to power different parts of their systems. Sometimes even when a site is run by a different platform, they'll still use WordPress as that kind of plugin for content. So there are a lot of ways to go through that. We'll touch on some issues that some of the lower hanging fruit, I guess, kind of doesn't quite hit a home run on, and just to urge some caution. So I'm not going to read through our list of site essentials, but you know, these are the things that you need to have in place to get your site going or to think about. Some other things that we're seeing that are really observing going into this year, Core Web Vitals, we've got a couple slides on that, so we'll talk about that. Chat options are endless. Do you have a preference on chat, Krystal? Like, is there somebody that you like out there?
Do you like engage?
Okay.
We
Okay.
send clients to engage.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. So we've used Engage. We've used a handful of others. They seem to kind of bounce around a little bit, but if you've had a good experience, I think then that speaks a lot.
Right.
And then the last one is ADA compliance. I mean, we had that, what was it, Domino's Pizza case, make it to the Supreme Court, and they ended up having to pay a pretty hefty fine because they were not compliant on their app, which then has been kind of translated to, this is probably going to start happening to other websites, when they're not compliant, if people are not able to use that. And so I don't think that that's going to happen anytime in the foreseeable future for the type of organizations that we work with. But I would advocate that, especially in the personal injury space, having your site be accessible is going to open up a share of the market that your competition has not touched.
Right.
There's a significant number of people with a number of disabilities that interfere with their ability to interact with a standard website. And why not target that market? It's not a super expensive thing to fix if you're building a site anyways. So I think it makes sense to take a look at it. Just to touch on Google Analytics, this is going to be kind of the number one thing that, as a business owner or principal, that you should be able to log into and take a look at. If you just look at a basic view that says, hey, how have we done over the last year? And you just want to know what kind of traffic you're getting, you should be able to log in and find that. I'm happy to walk anybody through that process. What we run into is we run into other agencies that will lock out the owner, that will not apply, that won't apply that ownership appropriately. And so the owner of the business may not have an ownership account in analytics. You want to make sure that you have that. And that's kind of the point I want to make here is, it's a relatively easy to use platform. Even if you just look at the dashboard, it's going to give you a pretty good 30,000 foot view on whether or not you're moving in the right direction.
How often do you recommend a client to look at their Google Analytics? I look at mine weekly. Obviously, yeah. I have nothing else to do, right? The client who really doesn't understand Google Analytics, how often should they be looking at it?
I mean, I think that weekly is probably pretty good, because Google Analytics is going to tell you a number of things. It's going to tell you if you have site outages, for example. Mm-hmm. It's going to tell you if you should anticipate an increase or decrease in business going forward. It's going to tell you if you need to do something more drastic, you need to rebuild your site. And so it does have pretty real world and instant. It's a metric that has real world impact, I guess I would say. So I would take a peek at it at least once a week. One of the things that I love, the way that I do it is I just have the app installed on my phone. And once you have the app installed, you don't have to go click around and be overwhelmed with data. The app is actually quite simple, and it's going to give you some metrics, and you just open the app, and then when you're done, you close it. You don't even have to browse anywhere.
Good to know.
So I feel like I need to go faster here because we're almost at half past, and we're not halfway through the deck. So I may speed up a little bit if that's okay. And again, just stop me. So I want to talk a little bit about this, and we're going to get into kind of some of the more technical stuff, but this is very important. So Google has about 200 ranking factors, 200 different factors that they look at when they weigh how well a site is going to show up in search, how often and how high. So how visible you're going to be in search. And for the most part, how we have to figure those out is by experimentation, by kind of some thought leaders in the space, trying things out, an A/B test, and seeing which one performs better. And we know that like inbound links is a big indicator. If you have a lot of links that point back to your site, we know that. We know that for some, at least to some degree, because we've tested it and we've had to find out. Once in a while, Google comes to the table and says, hey, you guys who own websites, you folks who own websites, we have an announcement to make, and we're going to change we're going to change one of those metrics. Now, they only do that when they are going to roll something out that's going to have a pretty dramatic impact. And two, that's going to have some sort of an improving factor to the user experience, because Google's primary job is to deliver the experience that a user wants, right? And they make money by serving ads as they do that. So they're very, very driven by improving the user experience on the web. And back in May of this year, they announced that they were going to be doing that. One of the ways we were going to be doing that is by taking a really hard look at these core web vitals. And so those core web vitals have to do with loading, interactivity, and visual stability. And so, you know, when we look at those three things, largest contentful paint is that first one, right? So what that means is, when does Google populate the page with the majority of your content? And we want it to be less than 2 seconds. So most sites that are out there right now are probably around the 6-second range. And so if you are in a position to shrink this down, we know that Google is going to treat you more favorably in search. And so we go through all this work to create good content. We go through all this work to create good inbound link structure. And then our competition goes out and makes sure their site loads better, and we may get beat. You know, I mean, it's hard to say what exactly the impact is going to be, but again, when they tell us, we usually should listen. So we want to get that down as low as possible. We've got some ways to do that listed here. You know, probably easiest thing to do is to talk to your web host and say, hey, how do you help us get this thing faster? Because sometimes you can put a bigger engine in it, and that will do the trick. But it's probably worth it. You know, the other things that you're going to have to look at is, you know, of course, these other things on here, but sometimes it's just going back in and saying, you know, we want to rebuild this thing. First input delay is what it sounds like. And they want this to be less than 100 milliseconds. So we're talking pretty lightning fast, you know, pretty quick. And here again, you know, we're talking about some pieces that are going to be a little harder to work on your own. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about like Wix and Squarespace. Though that type of site is not really going to give us the tools to address these things. And again, it doesn't mean you're going to disappear. There are 3 pieces out of 200 plus, but you know, I think that they're quite important nonetheless. And then this last one is cumulative layout shift. So, you know, if you've ever gone in and used a site and you go to click on a button, but the button has moved by the time that you click on it, that's what Google wants to get away from. And so they don't want to serve up sites that you can inadvertently add something to a cart or inadvertently click on something. So they're going to be looking at this. They're going to be looking at this really across your whole site. A couple ways to go about that too. There's a tool out there. You know, we did this on a staging site because we were rolling the site out and we were testing it. But, you know, there's a tool out there called Google Page Speed Insights. If you just do a quick Google search for Page Speed Insights, it'll be the top result. You can go, you can test out your own site, see where it lands on there. And it's going to have an announcement on there, basically, if you're getting enough traffic to say either you pass or you don't pass.
Okay.
All right. So now we need to go a little faster still. Usually I get through that first section a little quicker. So, you know, next we want to talk about content marketing. So this is where we've seen kind of the biggest return. We try to not talk about just SEO as SEO anymore. There's so many like snakes in the grass on that. And there's so much of an interest, I think, in the marketing world, especially for bad actors, to obfuscate and make it sound more complex than it is. You know, there is truth to the fact that like we need the structure to be in place and we need to understand how it works. But a huge driver of your visibility in search is to provide Google users what Google wants you to provide. And what Google wants you to provide is really good, engaging content that people want to spend time on. And Google's measuring that. So having a good content marketing strategy is really kind of one of your key approaches there. And it is an ongoing process. You know, what we find is that, you know, posting really at least right about at a cadence of about once a week, posting some content. And this is the kind of growth that we've seen. We're actually higher or above this now for 2020, but really consistent growth year after year, you know, of increasing traffic to a site, primarily through organic search and primarily by focusing on that content. again, Google has talked about, what are some of the factors and what are the questions you should ask about your content to make sure that it's working for you. And their response were these answers, so it's posted on a regular basis. If you can do about once a week or so, citations or references, that just helps solidify the fact that it's good. Right at about an 8th grade reading level, because that's going to be kind of the average that most people are comfortable reading. And then have a strategy. So have every piece that you write, have a keyword that you're aiming for that's unique to that article. And then, engaging original, targeting your audience's needs and concerns. I think it just requires this level of empathy, of saying, how do you put yourself in someone else's shoes, your audience's shoes? And what we find is that if we go all the way back to that branding piece, if we've done a good job defining those personas, now we're writing to that person. And when we're writing to that person, it's a whole lot easier. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking through this. We're going to make this deck available to anyone here, so we can send it out also. But, we've spent a lot of time kind of building out the approach that we find works effectively. Editorial calendar, create accountability, have someone be the owner. And we've done this both for, as an agency ourselves, but we've worked with our clients to have some of them just take this on in-house, and it may sound counterintuitive because that is how we survive as a business, right? That's how we make money. But we still have clients that we have taught how to do this, that have taken it in-house, that have made it successful. Now that's been the minority, but it's been the minority because the ones that make it work are the ones that are committed to it, and they have an owner, someone who's going to be accountable for that in-house. And when they do that, they can make it work. More information about how to set up the editorial calendar here. Again, we'll send this out. Feel free to copy this. We want to provide this, as something of value to the folks who wanted to come and listen to our webinar. Video, is projected to increase 82% by 2022. Some weird things that we've seen going into this year. The traditional thinking, as traditional as it gets, in a rapidly changing world, is that video with audio doesn't perform as well because nobody has the audio turned on. Weird thing, now that everybody's working out of their houses, they watch the video with the sound on. Remember, click it on. And so there's, I think it's about a 20 to 30% increase in engagement. Now, if you have audio as a part of your video, now you still need to have the subtitles and things like that, but nobody can predict the future. But I think that we're going to largely be at least somewhat socially distanced for the next year, right? If we make that assumption, then we need to be thinking now about the content we're going to be putting out over the next year. And then also the whole world has changed, right? Right. People are going to be working from home for the foreseeable future, and people's habits and behaviors are going to reflect that. And I think that the audio thing on video is going to increase, with COVID. Again, this is coming from, I don't have a date on there, but this is coming from Cisco. So it's relatively recent. We're going to see that increase. I think this is still pre-COVID. So we're going to see that increase probably significantly more.
Very interesting.
And the other thing, just to, on the video side, and I don't know if you're doing this now, but it's something we've been trying to do. We got this Mevo camera. And so if you're running a practice and you think, well, I can't afford to go and have a video crew come in and all of this stuff, look up that Mevo, M-E-V-O camera. It's about a $400 camera. You control the whole thing from your phone, so it doesn't have a viewfinder or anything like that. Your phone will automatically zoom in and zoom out. So it looks like it's doing the cuts that you would normally send off to a videographer. And you hit record, you hit stop, you hit upload to Vimeo. You need a Vimeo account, which is $7 a month. And if you have somebody with an iPad, or if you have somebody with a Mac, you have iMovie. Windows has something that's not as good. You can clip off the intro, the end. You can you can bookend it if you want to get real fancy. But you can put out good video through something like this all day long.
And it's very simple to do. Hire an intern or a marketing intern that can do that for you.
Yep.
I'm doing it.
Yep. So it just helps you put out that content, and it makes it accessible, almost more accessible than the blogging, right? Because if you're an attorney, you shouldn't be spending your time writing content, but you might spend 2 minutes shooting a video, answering a question. and using that on your social media. On the social media side, we follow what we call the rule of thirds. We do have an editorial calendar again here because it keeps everybody on pace and on track. We like the rule of thirds: a third about your firm, your staff, a third about the community, what you're doing in the community, other people, businesses that you want to highlight. And then a third can be your content. So this helps you kind of keep a good engaging mix. Still is great to be creative. It's great to have good design and do that too, but you really want to kind of focus on those areas. There are a number of different tools that are out there. Adobe Spark is one of them. There's a couple of others that really lets you just load up a picture, populate some graphics on top of it, in the course of a couple of minutes, as opposed to having a designer do it.
Mm-hmm.
So check out some of those tools. It's great. We do have an issue with negative comments on social media, especially when we're running a campaign. For example, like the Volkswagen campaign, we get a bunch of nasty things written by people who love their Volkswagen. And we try to respond to those, even if they're nasty. If they're offensive, they use bad language, then we'll delete them. The rule of thumbs is don't feed the trolls, and so if someone wants to argue, then don't engage. But it is a good idea to try to respond to those as best you can. So, what we've found is by doing all of these things together, looking between 2018, 2017 for one client of ours, we increased leads 112%, brought them up to first page keywords, which is kind of a questionable metric, but, about 200 keywords made it to the front page. In that case, many of those were legitimate. But I almost don't like including that data point, just because it is an often misused data point. So when you look at it and say, hey, we're going to get you first page keywords, like you could rank for the first, one of the keywords we rank on the first page is ancient advertising. That does not help us grow.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless we're recruiting college professors, which sometimes maybe it doesn't matter for the business, but we have seen good results. Of those 200, many were valuable, but just something to be aware of. And the 450% increase in organic traffic, that's been great. So KPIs, we love data. We love tracking data. We like to look at organic traffic. We like to look at conversion rate, both in paid and organic, right?
Mm-hmm.
We like to do that, and this is probably something you could speak to more effectively, but we like to build up that scorecard, and you probably, I think you were better equipped to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, when we're looking at key performance indicators with law firms, and especially in your marketing department, you want to look at what your website is doing, how it's performing, but then also how much are you spending in that area to get those results? How many leads did you get from that campaign? And then how many cases or clients did you get from that campaign? From there, it's going to give you a cost per lead and a cost per case. And when you start analyzing that over time, you're going to see that hopefully your organic traffic is going to increase and your marketing spend is going to decrease.
No, that totally makes sense. That's something that we need to add on the slide too, because I think the number one KPI is how many more clients have you gotten? How many clients have you gotten? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, these KPIs are, I consider them to be kind of early stage indicators. When we see them move in the right direction, usually that means that we're onto something. But ultimately, we should be looking at client, not just numbers, but names. And ideally, we're using a platform like what we'll talk about here on the automation side to track by name and see where people came in. So we're huge proponents of automation. We've used a platform for a few years that we've been very happy with. It's called SharpSpring. The downside of SharpSpring is it doesn't do a great job integrating with all the case management platforms out there. And some of those case management platforms are now adding some of that functionality. I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit, Krystal, but like we're seeing like Litify is starting to add some of that. There's a what is it? Not Law Tiger, but there's another one that's starting to add some to it too.
Law Roller. A lot of your newer case management systems are adding those APIs to be able to integrate the data. Some case management systems already come with a tracking system in there, but sometimes they're not as robust as what they promise you. So be careful when you're looking at that. Again, SharpSpring is probably one of the most popular ones that we recommend to clients because of you guys.
Now we love it. It's good. Their model is good. It's inexpensive compared to your HubSpots and Marketos that are out there. And it actually gives you the ability, if you want to use it, it gives you the ability to dynamically populate text on your site. So these are some great stats here, but what this boils down to is that, you know, if you can really measure and you can really automate some pieces of this, but still have it appear to be very, very organic, then it's going to help you. So marketing automation through email, you know, 86% said it improved their nurturing because you can control it and it can be very consistent and it can still be very personable. And so kind of how this works at a very high level, you know, you collect your data into one data point, you know, SharpSpring lets us do that. The other ones out there do as well. And then we take that and we put them into lists, we'll separate them out. And then we build workflows that say, hey, when this happens, then do this other thing. And what we've done in a very simple level is, you know, we'll say, okay, when a new lead comes in, then these 17 things happen. When they become a client, those 15 that haven't happened yet get pulled off. And now a new 10 things happen to say, hey, thank you for choosing us. We've gotten so used to that in like every aspect of our lives. Like when I go to the dentist, I get a text message afterwards, you know, with a survey. How was their service? I get a text message to remind me of my appointment. Now, SharpSpring doesn't currently do the text messaging stuff very much, although they will for alerts for you. But the same for email, right? Like I get an email reminder, you know, and that's become the expectation, and it should be the expectation in the PI world as well. And again, thinking back to that funnel, we generate the lead, but we still do need to nurture it. So automation lets us do that. You know, this data point here, 451% increase in qualified leads. We're using that so that when we built that brand, especially the PI world, you know, we don't know when someone's going to need to hire you. And they could be out, you know, you could be completely irrelevant to them until the one day that you are relevant. And so what we use is we use automation to build lists using a variety of different tactics. And then we stay in front of those lists with content that is written for that audience. So we're not just talking about car wrecks and what to do after you've been in a car wreck. We're talking about how to keep your family safe. And we're talking about, you know, the rules of the road for bicyclists and pedestrians and things like that. And so we're able to keep that list, continue to grow the list, and yet stay relevant, keep the brand kind of front and center. So we want to take a look at these things. Again, we'll send this out. I don't want to read through the slide here. Take a look at these things, measure your performance, and then improve upon it. We want to look at KPIs for email as well. You know, open rate, click through. List growth rate is a huge one because most platforms now are also starting to, they're starting to pull back a little bit and say, hey, if you're not engaging with your audience, we're not going to let you just send out emails because then that's going to damage their sender score. You know, their email servers are going to get blacklisted and they're not going to be effective. So we always need to focus on building a list. We do that a number of ways. You know, I love the Lyft ride giveaway type things. COVID's changed a little bit of that too, but you know, anything that you could do to kind of shoehorn or dovetail that in with what we talked about early on, which is what people expect brands to do as we're going through COVID, you know, which is really try to help the community. So you can do all these things at once. You can build your list, you can improve the standing of your brand, you know, the appearance of your brand, and you can actually help out, you know, so it just seems like it's a win-win-win. All right, so now we get into a little bit of paid advertising here. What we like to do is we like to have a pretty good handle on the future, right? And we can't tell the future, so what do we do to get a temperature? You know, this is a tool that's available. It's free. It's from Google. You know, look at search trends. We like to plug in search trends to see, you know, if people are looking for attorneys more or less, different things that are happening kind of in the world around us. You know, we like to look at that because then it informs this, you know, which is some crazy trends that we're seeing right now. You know, March 2020 versus April 2020, 200% increase in conversions, 33% decrease in cost per conversion for a divorce attorney. um, which is not surprising because in China there was a 500% increase in divorces um, as they were getting through that lockdown. Um, we have a family law client, and so we were, one of them we've been able to see this with very well. Um, we saw a big decrease on auto accident attorney searches. Now those are coming back up, of course, because it seems like even though we probably still have fewer cars on the road, we all forgot how to drive. And so car wrecks seem to be increasing a bit. Estate planning has just gone through the roof. And so there's a very real, very one-to-one ratio of what's going on in the world, what we're seeing, and how we're dealing with it. And if you're working with somebody, if you're handling this stuff in-house, you need to be cognizant of these things, adjust your strategies accordingly, right? I mean, 200% increase in conversions, 33% decrease in cost per conversion. How much can you handle? How much do you want to grow? At some point you reach a point where you say, hey, we didn't need to spend as much on our marketing because we're maxing out our caseload. And that's great. Then you can choose to grow or expand or stay the size that you are if you want to, if you know kind of what you can expect.
How often should they be looking at these trends?
I mean, I think about once a month to once a quarter.
Okay.
I think that if you're doing paid search, then I think whoever you're doing that with needs to be looking at this stuff. Pretty much, they should be in there every day, right? So every day they should be checking the account, checking keywords, making sure there's no spikes or things like that. They should be using a tool that highlights irregularities.
Mhm.
We use a tool called Optio that's quite it's relatively inexpensive, for somebody, even if you're doing it in-house. Usually those types of tools are kind of weighted to the agency. If you're working with an agency, then they should be looking at that every day, and they should be pulling, you know, spikes and dips on a weekly basis, sending
Right.
them over, and then about once a month they should be going through this, with you to say, here's some of the trends that we're seeing. This is some, we're seeing
Okay.
this increase, this decrease, because otherwise it's just, hey, it sure feels like we're getting a lot of cases these days. How do you make a decision? You can't make a decision off of that. One thing that we did see going into, you never have super pure data ever, but this was pretty close. Now this was towards the beginning of COVID. We had a client say, cut my PPC spend, just kill it. So okay, so we did that, and their organic traffic just dive bombed. And then as soon as we turned it back on again, it just shot back up. And so Google likes to make the case that they do not do that. They don't, they don't give priority to their spenders. And I don't know how much of it was just, name recognition, people seeing it out there, but there was a very one-to-one ratio. We repopulated it, and it went through the roof.
Very
Um,
interesting.
I mean, the other thing that we see is, we have clients who will jump in and dip their toe in the waters of PPC or programmatic, and then they pull out in 3 months because they're not getting the results they wanted. It usually takes about 3 months to kind of start to really dip into it and get effective. We have some ways to speed that up. We do our best to do that, but when you hit about your 6-month mark, you really should start hitting your stride, and things should be getting a little more normalized. So it does take a little bit of time. And anybody that tells you otherwise is probably not that good at it, and they're just trying to get your money for 3 months. So here again, these are kind of like leading indicators. Ultimately, like Krystal said, like through SharpSpring, we can actually look at individuals and say, this is how they got to you. Did they become a client? And we just had some great news actually from a mutual friend of ours that, I mean, great news. I feel like always has to have an asterisk in the personal injury side of things, but they just settled a case for $9 million.
Wow.
What we were able to do was we were able to go into SharpSpring, find that initial interaction, and directly attribute that to what we're doing on the digital marketing side. And so we can usually see like what was that thing that got them there. And in that case, we were able to do that. Now, from their perspective, what they know is that their investment in the work that we're doing has paid for itself, right? And we've been able to do that actually twice with them. So we have, so they've brought in $18 million worth of cases, which get out about a third. So they've had a pretty good ROI for the spend that they've spent with us. because the success of our campaigns is built on the baseline case, which is about $30,000 settlement. So we've been paid for. But it's nice because then they have that data point. You know, the law firm principals have the data point to say, is this working? Is this not working? You know, these are kind of some leading indicators here too. You know, quality score and then cost per conversion are the two that I pay the most attention to when I'm looking at this. Because if you know what you're paying for a conversion, you can then do the math to see how many of those conversions actually became cases.
Right.
I want to save some time for some Q&A if we have any. I don't see that we have any so far. So I guess I just put it out there now. If any questions about any of this, I'm happy to talk through it. But I also want to spend just a couple minutes about security, talking about security. So when COVID hit, we saw security incidences just blow through the roof. And a big driver of that is a couple of things. One is change, right? Whenever people change their habits, then it gives malicious actors an opportunity to insert themselves in that change. Two, you know, we're moving away from more enterprise level security, you know, at the internet level, at the router level or firewall level, and we're moving over into home-based routers and modems. And those systems can and are compromised, and they're compromised all the time. A friend of mine he's got a title about a mile long, but he's the VP for digital security for Spectrum Health, which is one of the biggest healthcare providers here in Michigan, anyways, in West Michigan. And he shows me this image, and it's a world map, and it's covered in dots of varying sizes. And he says, these are all the attacks over a given day, you know, that we've experienced. And I think that's amazing. And he says, no, this is at my house. He's like, this is at my house. This is how many people are trying to break into our house. Not the healthcare system, but just the house. And, you know, we have clients who have had their systems breached that we inherited. So we inherited their site and we went in and we, you know, addressed that. We're building a new one, but in the meantime, they wanted us to host it. You know, they'd been at least exposed, you know, to Russian, Chinese hackers, and we could tell based off the tools that they're using. So 60% of small businesses that get an attack, they go out of business in 6 months. So it's very serious. And most of those happen through human error, you know, so, you know, 24% solely due to human error, you know, more than 50% involve a malicious attack. And so you're running a law firm, you have confidential information all over the place, social security numbers, health information. You have to make sure that your ducks are in a row here. One of the tools of many that we've found to be very useful in doing this, we used KnowBe4, but there's others like Sophos and RapidOne. You know, most of your breaches are going to have a human in them at some point. They're going to click on an email or do something like that. KnowBe4 is the one, like I said, we use, I'm most familiar with. But what that's going to do is that's going to create and send fake phishing and spear phishing emails. You're going to provide them with some of your organizational structure, your list, here's contact information, and then it's going to test your employees. And then it's going to give them feedback and give them training to run through so that you avoid that. You know, we've had both. So we've had a client that's had their website be breached. And it was breached because it was built wrong and we didn't build it. But we did find the issues. We had to make them aware of that. We've also had a client who has been the victim of a breach, you know, on their own personal stuff. And so they had a ransomware attack and lock it down. You know, so a company like Garmin reportedly spent like 9 million or something like that just to unlock their stuff. So the risk is real. The solutions are out there. You need to make sure, you know, that you need to do it. And then what you really need to do is use multi-factor authentication. So use that in your Office 365. Back up your Office 365. We use a third party to do that ourselves that I'm happy with, called Virtual Systems, and they do a great job with it. It is inexpensive. What I think a lot of organizations don't realize is that Office 365, if an employee deletes something after about 90 days, it's gone forever. And how many files do you have on your system that you wouldn't notice were gone for 90 days? Like so many. So you have to have that third party backup system in place. using platform. We like this platform. It's called Veeam, and it does a great job. Locking that up. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking through this, but Krystal, you may have some thoughts on this. But we put together kind of three. There's the do-it-yourself approach, hire somebody in-house, working with an agency. And here's some red flags. If you're working with an agency and you don't see these things, or this is weird, then just kind of some red flags to look for there. And I think one of the most important ones is how transparent are they? Are they helping you understand what you're doing, or are they just trying to obfuscate it? And so we want to try to help you understand, because when you understand, you're going to make better decisions. You're going to find a partner, who's going to work with you, and kind of go from there.
Right. My advice is if you are not getting your questions answered from your marketing company, or you're doing it in-house, reach out to some experts, reach out to Chip, let him walk you through that process.
That sounds good. Well, I don't see any questions. Do you have any questions for us to answer, Krystal? We can come up with our own now.
I do not.
All right.
We
Cool.
made it in time, 3 minutes. We did pretty good this time.
I know. It's hard to not. I just keep going. I just keep talking. It's terrible.
One thing I do want to add is, when you're going through your security measures with your employees, make sure you add that not only to your training program for new hires and ongoing hires, but also add it to your disaster recovery plan. Your disaster recovery plan is not just, hurricanes or tornadoes or earthquakes or fires or anything like that. It is COVID, it is security breaches. It's all those things that could happen that would put you out of business.
That's a great call. That totally makes sense. So appreciate everybody sticking around for this presentation. Thanks, Krystal, for doing this with me. I appreciate it. It's been fun. We'll make sure that we keep the recording, make that available. We'll make sure the deck gets sent out to everybody as well. We'll find a place to put it on both our sites so that anybody can track that down and get a hold of it. And just appreciate everybody taking the time.
Okay. Thanks, Chip. Have a great evening.
Thanks. You too. Take care. Bye.